Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining today. I know some more will kind of trickle in. Super stoked for Earth Month here to be talking with Nathan McGovern of Plant-Based Universities. I think there's always this intersection and challenge of the work of, is it systems change, is it individual change, and what can individuals kind of do beyond their own diet or consumption patterns? And I think today's conversation is really going to be empowering to see the power that individuals can play within systems level change in a really thoughtful, strategic, and diplomatic way. So the way today will work, Nathan's going to give a little bit of an overview of the work they are doing across the pond and hopefully how that can kind of translate or at least inspire us here in the US and beyond and wherever anyone else is calling in from today. So we'll have time for Q&A and more of a discussion after, but I'll go ahead and turn it over to Nathan. And thank you all for being here. And thank you, Nathan, for your time and leadership.
Cool, that's wonderful. Yeah, thank you, Eric, Samantha, and yeah, everyone at Plant Futures for all the work that you're doing as well. I was really inspiring to see everything happening at Food for Thought at the weekend as well. So I'm going to share my screen, or at least attempt to, and get cracking. I'm used to doing it on Zoom and not Google Meet, so bear with me a second.
There's an up arrow next to the smiley face. There you go. Perfect.
Cool. I think we might be there. All right. So yeah, first of all, yeah, my name is Nathan. I'm a co-founder of Plant-Based Universities, although don't take that term too seriously. It's one I mainly use just for when I have to make media appearances. And today I'm going to be talking about two of the main points of our strategy that have been what I would say the two biggest reasons for our success. First of all, my email is at the bottom of the screen there. If anyone wants to get in touch with me after this, please note that down. And I'm always happy to answer questions and chat with people further about anything related to what I'm about to talk about. So first of all, structure of the session, I'll talk a little bit about like who we are, what is Plant-Based Universities, our history, and then get on to the real kind of meat of the session, pardon the pun. We're talking about transformative asks and campaigning as opposed to incremental asks, and how to organize volunteers on a grassroots level to create leaders and winning campaigns, before obviously leaving some time for questions at the end. So without further ado, what is Plant-Based Universities? We are a student-led and student-driven animal rising campaign. So Animal Rising, for those of you who don't know, is a UK-based organisation that in the past has predominantly been known for non-violent direct action. So most recently disrupting the biggest horse races in the United Kingdom, alongside rescuing some sheep that belonged to King Charles III. So doing that kind of high-level direct action media grabbing stuff, but also what's been very important is a kind of an evolution in our organisation is running these institutional change campaigns that are very specifically targeted at important socio-economic, socio-political parts of society. So universities, local government, and now we have a Vegan Support the Farmers campaign, which is aiming to build bridges between our movement and farmers so that we can talk about how do we transition our food system in a way that works for everyone. So Plant-Based Universities is a system change focused campaign. We are not a kind of go vegan outreach group. We very explicitly make our target the university structure, university catering, and talk in terms of a university responsibility to act on the obligations that they have, whether that's sustainability obligations to their students, that sort of thing. Although, as I'll get into in a bit, you kind of have this like, mirror or shadowing effect where this can happen in people's personal lives as well, because we provide the space for this conversation in universities. And again, I'll be talking about it briefly, but we're a transformative campaign, not an incremental campaign. And what that means is that the only thing that we ever campaign for is the absolute 100% transition of university catering. We don't run meat-free Mondays campaigns or default veg campaigns as like stepping stones. We always frame everything in terms of the absolute 100% change. And again, as I'll get into in a bit, there's very good reason for that. And then moving on to the way that we operate kind of as an organization, is walking this tightrope between centralization and decentralization, where we have a core team of full-time people who are coordinating, doing mission setting, goal setting, direction, and giving like assistance and help to the hundreds of student volunteers that we have who innovate and implement our strategy in their particular context. And so far, that's worked quite well, because rather than thinking of our organization in terms of transactions and how do we just achieve wins, how do we just achieve concrete measurable results, we focus very much like Plant Futures does, and partly inspired by Plant Futures, on creating leadership and personal development, so that students come through, you know, the 2, 3, 4, 5 years they might spend at universities, go out into the world, and they have been equipped to campaign and use their skills. And then just a bit of like numbers for where we are at now. So we're active in 80 plus universities, around 60 of those in the UK, around 15, 20 in Europe, and then 2 pilot projects in the US, with 12 wins at a kind of student union, student council level, where we've passed motions or votes or got declarations of support from representative student bodies within universities, some of which actually do have control of catering, which is fantastic because we combine symbolic wins with material wins. And yeah, since the September of 2022, so about a year and a half, 9 months or so ago, we've been mentioned 1,300 times in online media, around 25 live TV and radio interviews in that time. So not just impacting universities, but impacting society at large, which is absolutely fantastic, because as I will talk about shortly, that is our real goal. So a bit of a run through of the history of plant-based universities. So we began in the November of 2021. It was kind of a fusion where there was a couple of us. We were students studying at university in London. I was doing my master's at King's College London at the time, and some people within Animal Rising, or Animal Rebellion as it was known, who saw the opportunity to affect societal change through the medium of universities. So we started in 3 universities, 2 in London and 1 in the Midlands in the UK, really with the mentality of, we're going to throw the kitchen sink at it, and if it doesn't work, that is absolutely fine. We just take the data back and we re-strategize. And that is an approach that we've kept through everything that we've done with plant-based universities. If we never go in with the expectation of, oh, this is going to work first time, you know, I'm going to be really upset if this doesn't work. Our approach is always, we put 100% in. Even if we lose materially, we still have a win somewhere in terms of the data we've collected, the conversations that we've started. So that was 2021, really just seeing, can this work? Can we organize students effectively? And really great to say that we could. So that brought us to summer of 2022, where we've gone from 3 to about 20, 25 active student groups in the UK. We had our first summer camp, a couple of pictures here, lovely, kind of brought like 50 vegan students together for the weekend. Most of them says it's the best weekend they've ever had of their life, which honestly is one of the highest compliments I've ever received. And that meant that we were able to deliver very high quality training over the course of 2.5 days before people went back to their universities, colleges for you guys, and were able to put this into practice. And about a year after we first launched, so in November of 2022, a year of trying and seeing what happens, we had our first victory, where we saw that our campaign strategy, our ask, is realistic. We can achieve it if we put the effort, we put the time in, and we also get a little bit of luck. So Stirling University Students' Union in Scotland voted to go 100% plant-based in their catering, which affected 3 outlets within university. First time this has happened anywhere on the planet. And as you can expect, created a lot of news, a lot of waves in society as well. It's obviously a topic that gets clicks for tabloid newspapers and that sort of thing. So we really were able to push this conversation in society and also show that it is achievable, that it can be done. And then that brought us on to early 2023, where we had a similar vote at the University of Cambridge, and this real landslide of momentum. We saw other universities in London as well, London Metropolitan University and Queen Mary University of London, take these votes also. So they're really building this like winning energy, but no, not without bumps in the road. So there's a group in the UK called the Countryside Alliance, which might sound nice and fluffy, but essentially was set up in the late 1990s to fight UK government trying to ban fox hunting, and they essentially lobby against anything plant-based, anything vegan, anything anti-hunting. So they found out that we were proposing a motion at the University of Edinburgh and mobilized a lot of veterinary science students to vote against it. But we didn't view this as a total loss. Even though we lost the vote, we still created conversation out of it. And that's a theme that I'm going to be taking forward, is that material wins are not everything that we should be focusing on as a movement. And if we take a different approach and a different theory of change, we can view just creating conversation as a very important aspect of what we're doing. And then kind of through the summer of 2023, we had another set of summer camps. We had 3 last year, had about 100 students over the 3 weekends, set us up really fantastically for September last year, where we released an open letter calling on university catering to go 100% plant-based. It was backed by around 650 academics. I believe we're now on about 1,200, which to my knowledge is the single biggest declaration of academic support for a plant-based food system. I was able to appear for like 5-6 minutes on a UK's most watched breakfast television show, watched by about 1 million people daily. So really getting this wide societal reach, as well as having these like material wins. So we're able to tell this story to the British population, and now going beyond that and into Europe as well, because we had our first non-UK win last December at the University of Graz in Austria. It was written about in national news in Austria. We gained the backing. We didn't have to work for it. The Austrian kind of national representative body of students was approached for comment, and they said, we 100% support this. So getting support from these very influential third parties, whilst also continuing our wins in the UK at Warwick, and most recently at Newcastle, as well as launching in the Netherlands. So that brings us to where we are now, which is a very strong international campaign with people all the way across Europe and on both coasts of the US working on this project as well for 100% plant-based university catering. So that brings me into talking about the first major strategic kind of pillar of plant-based universities, and that is a almost entire focus on transformative change campaigning rather than incremental change. Now, the difference between them can be summed up in a couple of sentences. So transformative change campaigns focus on changing what's possible. Incremental change campaigns focus on achieving what's possible. So your transformative change campaigns, like to give an analogy, it's you're moving goalposts, basically. You're changing the terms of the debate so that you can achieve more than what people think you're going to be able to achieve right now. Very much focused on these like symbolic demands or asks like our 100%. And as I say there, designed to completely change the way that people talk about a topic. And crucially, you do this by, when you have a transformative change campaign, is engineering this state of like real urgency and dilemma, an issue that needs to be dealt with as soon as physically possible, rather than something that can just simmer away in the background. And that's what you can do very effectively in our case, where you bring climate messaging in. You talk about the fact that we have an ongoing climate crisis. This is affecting every single one of us right now in ways that we don't even know about, and it's going to get unbelievably worse. You can bring the urgency of the climate crisis in a way that sometimes you can't bring with other things. Sometimes people don't feel the moral urgency of the scale of animal suffering, although of course that is absolutely possible. And then on the other side of that, your incremental change campaigns, where it's, you look at the political landscape and you think, what are the things that I can achieve if the world around me doesn't change? So instrumental demands or asks. So really clear examples of these are like meat-free Mondays, default veg, where in reality, they're actually very easy to achieve. They've been talked about for years, if not decades. No newspaper headlines are being made by it, but it is steps in the right direction. And I do have to say that, they are good in and of themselves, but that, there's maybe an imbalance right now in today's landscape between incremental and transformative. And yeah, your incremental change, I continue, is about, carrying on a conversation that's happening, not too radical, it doesn't change too much, and very heavily based upon this like pragmatic view of change and this one step at a time approach, taking what you can get rather than like this big picture, big change thinking. Now, most social change campaigns are really a blend of both of these kind of visions. However, it must be said that the vast majority of change that's happening at the moment, or pushes for change happening at the moment, especially in our movement, is incremental. And something that I'll talk quite a lot about in this presentation is balance, and it needs to have both sides of organizing and of trying to make change because they do work together in synergy. They do actually complement each other rather than work against each other. And when we have more transformative change campaigns, they enable the success of the incremental change campaigns also. So just a gloss of what plant-based universities is after. I mentioned kind of like a mirroring effect of, our big focus is transformative institutional change, university catering changing to 100% plant-based. But what this can do is, when we talk about, making like news, getting those interviews, is have this like reverberating effect on a social level. So you can talk on the television, you can write op-eds, features, be quoted when journalists are writing up articles about it. And that's not just going to be read by students, that's going to be reaching the general population. So you can, on a smaller level, be achieving these like transformative and incremental changes. On a social level, you might have someone that reads an article and is like, all right, I'm going to stop eating meat now. I'm going to stop consuming dairy now. And that in and of itself is a good thing. But you might also get the people who are like, all right, I'm going vegan now. I've been convinced that is it, which is fantastic. And then also important to mention, like on a institutional level, if in our campaigns we get offered default oat milk, or we got offered meat-free Mondays, like of course we don't say no. We always frame it in a context of like, this is what we're actually eventually looking for. We're actually very honest with that as well, and oftentimes we can find that we achieve those incremental changes much faster than if we just campaigned for them on their own. And then on an individual level, if you have began these conversations in your university, at least as far as we find, by talking about the institution, something that people aren't instantly defensive about, you can then have the conversation with them about the changes that they can make. We often coach our campaign in terms of, we make the most sustainable choice, the easiest one for students to make. And that means, if they're eating one meal a day on campus, that's, 5 meals a week, Monday to Friday, that we have given them, plant-based or given them vegan, if that's how you want to say it. So we can achieve those transformative and incremental changes on an individual level as well, really by like having this like domino effect out from having this really specific focus and very targeted message on transformative institutional change. And briefly, before I move on to the second thing I want to talk about, is really touching on, again, why we need to prioritize transformative change right now. That strategic context of the climate and ecological crisis means that we are really staring at a fundamental shift in human civilization. If we don't do something, we do not do something quite immediately. And our food system is going to be part of that. Our food system has to be a part of that. It's an incredibly compelling conversation, especially in a university context, in Europe at least. Then practical impacts of transformative change. So I'd like to share with you a couple of examples that underscore how we've achieved incremental changes much quicker than other groups have. So the London Metropolitan University, within a month of beginning their plant-based universities campaign with 100% ask, they got given meat-free Mondays. The university made that switch because of the big ask of plant-based universities campaign. But at another university in London, the London School of Economics, a few years ago, they had to campaign for 2 years to get meat-free Mondays. So 1 month versus 2 years, because we went with a really, really big ask. And they're always going to give you something lower if you ask for something a lot more. And then also for Humane Society International UK, they have a Forward Food Programme where they work with institutions, work with the universities on menu shifts. Like on like a lower level, they'll wait for universities to come to them, or they'll approach universities with like asking, can we make 20 or 30% of your menu plant-based? They said that the single biggest spike that they have had in universities approaching them to change small parts of their menus was because of what plant-based universities did with our open letter. So across the board, we see that transformative change campaigns have the real ability to maximize and speed up the impacts of your incremental change campaigns. And then lastly, here is the cultural impacts of a transformative change campaign. Like, they are so inspiring to be part of. It's a big ask. It brings in the people who have those big visions, big dreams, and who are driven to work with ambitious goals. And also outside your team, people can see that, wow, people are going for this big thing. I should be taking that seriously as well. And then with this kind of idea that 100% plant-based, like, it does disrupt people's thoughts. It does reframe the whole conversation. That means that you don't even, have to go and block roads. You don't even have to do any wild direct action, because the disruption is caused by what you're saying rather than what you're doing. So you can create that conversation and create that change in a much more effective way than if you were going for something smaller. And then again, perhaps the biggest reason for this prioritization right now is the massive imbalance in social movements, particularly the animal movement, towards incremental change campaigning rather than transformative change. There is really a huge gap anywhere really that you look in the world for groups to be coming in and making these big asks because they understand that it benefits the movement and not just their own organization. Now, naturally, with transformative change campaigns, you can get a bit disheartened when you don't achieve anything. You don't seem to achieve anything quite quickly because they're big. They don't happen overnight. It might require a year or two of campaigning. So a very vital part of running a transformative change campaign is being able to define your own wins and to be publicizing them, to be telling the story and achieve those small things that you've defined yourself on the way. So why do we want to do that? So to narrate the story of always being a winning team, always being on the side of success, it creates like belief and buy-in to your mission from your team, and also enables you again to tell that story of societal change, that this is happening. It's not, one thing that's going to happen in the future, that this is happening now and we're building towards it. And a really good example of success from this is Otpor and the Serbian Revolution, where they would set very in terms of material, meaningless targets of like, we're going to have 10 protests this week, or we're going to have like, I don't know, stick up 100 posters tonight. And like, that was very easy to do. So when they did that, they celebrated and said like, look at us, look how well we're doing, inspires people in the team, inspires people to see what they're doing. And then an example of failure of this is the Occupy movement, where it's in the name, like as soon as you fail to occupy Wall Street or occupy the London Stock Exchange, you failed, and there's no way of getting back from that. So with a transformative change campaign, always being able to find those wins that you can claim to be achieving along the way as well, even if they might not be, like serious material wins, even if it's just like, our goal is to have a meeting with the head of catering this term, and you do that, you celebrate that, and you say that we're being taken seriously in these negotiations, look at how we're doing. Now, moving on away from talking about transformative change to the second very key pillar of plant-based universities and our success is effectively grassroots organizing to create leaders and winning campaigns. So with that transformative change mindset, we inspire people with big goals, but also big asks of, can you coordinate this university campaign? Can you take on this position of responsibility? It really brings good people through who are going to step up and do that. And to make that happen, you need to have good internal development in a team, and that always mirrors in your external results and vice versa. You don't really get one without the other. So something that we are very hot on is delivering like quality in-person, ideally trainings. Our summer camps, we had a winter retreat as well. We periodically run online where needed trainings and things like social media, press, outreach, that sort of thing, to really equip students to become the best possible leaders that they can. But we do this without being lured into absolutes in this. And that is so important on the centralization versus decentralization question, which is where a lot of social movements tend to just fall apart, where they feel like they have to go all in on one of these camps. But I think we have shown that you can very effectively tread a middle ground between them that combines the pros and avoids the cons of them. And then lastly is by prioritizing transformative leadership over transactional leadership. And I'll get onto that very briefly. So firstly, centralization and decentralization. Must be said, both approaches, they have good things and they have bad things. So it's about how do we pull what we want out of both whilst getting rid of what we don't need in them. So on the centralization side, very clear goals being set, by a central body is so helpful because it keeps everyone in a campaign aligned towards a single vision or pointed in the same direction. You can have very clear chains of communication and roles because everything is very clearly understood when you've got everything linked into kind of the center of the spider's web. However, huge weaknesses of centralization naturally is that you can end up, and a lot of times you do end up creating unhealthy hierarchies where you've got someone who is like essentially your line manager who's telling you what to do, micromanaging you, and that really disempowers people. They feel like they don't own the project that they're part of and eventually end up leaving. And that also contributes to this kind of rigidity, loss of creativity, where you always feel like, oh, I have to ask so-and-so for permission to do something. I need to get the go-ahead and that sort of thing. So how do we kind of get away from that? Is by bringing in the strengths of decentralization. So strengths of decentralization, naturally, you've created so much space for innovation and adaptability from people who are working in that. They don't feel like they have to always ask for permission to do things, because they're making the decisions on the ground. They can make them quickly and they can step into them rather than feel they always have to ask for permission. And again, on that is decentralization really encourages people to step into responsibility rather than step away from it and shirk it off and give it to the person who is their line manager or anything to that effect. However, on the weaknesses, you can really get very quickly into the tyranny of structurelessness, as has kind of been coined with decentralization, where nobody knows what anyone else is doing. You start setting different fundamental goals, but also trying to say you're part of the same campaign. So an example for us might be if we descended too far in that direction, we might have one university campaigning for Meat Free Mondays, one university campaigning for 100% plant-based, one university campaigning for default veg, and it just falls apart because you have no consistent messaging, which is the second point here. Is your purely decentralized campaigns have a huge vulnerability to splintering and loss of purpose because you don't have links into the kind of center of the spider's web. So there's a huge need to constantly be appraising and understanding the way that your organization is working, the way that your campaigns are working. The way that we do this in our campaign is by, as I mentioned, we have a very small core team of 5 full-time volunteers. And we all have day-to-day contact and roles where we coordinate regions. So, for example, I coordinate the Netherlands and the Nordic countries. Someone else coordinates Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. Others coordinate individual regions within the UK. So anyone who is part of this campaign in their university has someone in the center who they're linked to, who they're in contact with, who they're talking to, who they're seeking advice from, to build this relationship where everything links into the center. But also, we empower people to make decisions and to innovate and to do and run their campaigns on a local level by prioritizing transformative leadership over transactional, which is where I move now. And this is the last slide, I believe, before I'll open it up for questions. So the key to having this good balance between centralization and decentralization is very consciously prioritizing transformative leadership over transactional. So again, in a sentence, transformative leadership aims to create leaders. Transactional leadership intends to create results. So your transformative leadership is vision and people oriented. It's about how do I create very capable people rather than organize a team just to achieve a win. So it's about having comprehensive training programs, always be offering like mentoring from people who are in your core team to upskill everyone else. And it's something that someone said to me that stuck quite well, is that we should always be teaching people to do the things that we know how to do and be learning how to do the things that we do not know how to do. It's amazing how many people just get stuck in one little area and then they just kind of get a monopoly on how to do something rather than teaching other people and learning themselves. So we keep this very long-term vision of expanding our network of capable workers, capable leaders, to further our movement. So what we can see is, like, in a lot of ways, just like achieving results, succeeding at tasks is actually just a byproduct of creating a healthy and effective team and creating good leaders. And the focus, again, on this transformative side is how do we coordinate, how do we communicate, and how do we cooperate with each other to make people who are going to carry this movement forwards. And then on your transactional side, so your primary motivations are reward and discipline. Kind of, you know, if you're in school, you might, I don't know, get a perk, or you might get detention if you're behaving badly. Kind of very carrot and stick here, and really tending towards a short-term vision of completing tasks of just increasing magnitude. So I don't know, asking someone to hand out leaflets 1 day a week, they do that, and then can you hand out leaflets 2 days a week, and so on. And really prioritizing strategy over culture and getting things done over creating people who just get things done. And the focus here is really like on control and process, and it's fairly rigid. Although I will finish this by saying, again, it's so important not to fall into binary thinking. There are merits of both approaches. Of course, we want results, but we also want to create leaders. So it's about how do we include both of these in our approach. Now, before I open for questions, I do want to suggest some further reading for anyone who is particularly interested in the two kind of big things I've talked about: transformative campaigning and effective organizing of grassroots campaigns. First is This Is an Uprising by Mark and Paul Engler, Doing Democracy by Bill Moyer, Blueprint for a Revolution by Sergej Popovich, Hegemony How To by Matthew Smucker, Scuttle Mindset by Julia Galef, and The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. And I will say that the first and the last ones, if you're only going to choose two, those are the ones to choose. This Is an Uprising and The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team are, if you're in social movement and social change, they are absolute must reads, and I would really go out of your way to read them. They sum up a lot of the themes that I've talked about today better than I ever could. So yeah, I thank you for your time, and I'll stop sharing my screen and open up for questions.
I'll start off with one. Thank you so much, Nathan. I think there's so much to digest, and I think first of all, it'd be great to be at one of those summer camps with you and be with all those students. It sounds like just a really great piece. Something I appreciate is just how you really center people and the humanity of the people you work with beyond just this kind of transactional relationship. I'm curious for you, maybe what were some early on failures or just some misfirings that really helped you all improve or learn? You know, I think anytime these students are going to think about creating a campaign or doing something or building community, there's this like idea of success, but then there's maybe that failure or just those misfirings. And what were maybe some of those that happened early on in the process of plant-based universities that enabled you all to really be more effective in the long term?
Yes, so I'd say instantly springing to mind are two early failures. And one, I'm not sure how to phrase it, perhaps it's underestimating the committedness of a lot of students, where we kind of had it in our heads at the start. Some of us are like, oh, students aren't going to be prepared to have like a 3-hour training before they start their campaign. They're not going to want that. We need to boil it down into an hour. And we did that, and we ended up really failing students who wanted to campaign because we didn't equip them with the skills that they needed. So they became dependent on the core team because they hadn't developed their leadership capabilities. And we found out that actually people are willing to spend 3 hours doing a training. They are willing to spend a whole weekend with you doing workshops and training that actually creates them into effective leaders. And I think that was a very early failure that we hopefully we've remedied now. And secondly is on the decentralization centralization question. We've actually kind of bounced in sometimes between both of those. So at the start, we were probably too decentralized, a little bit too soupy. We didn't have a clear organizing structure of roles in the core team of who was responsible for what to keep everything held together. So we did have a lot of problems with people diluting the transformative demand and not getting fully bought into it. And then on the flip side of that, in the past few months, and it's something we've realized that we hadn't been doing, is transparently communicating to the rest of the plant-based university community what the core team is doing, what we're working on centrally, and that sort of thing, which led to a lot of people feeling like a bit disenfranchised and a little bit disempowered. So that second one, that decentralization, centralization, it really is a constant battle. It's a seesaw that you kind of just have to, make sure that you don't tip one way too far, and you recognize if you have done.
Yeah, and if anyone else has questions, please feel free to either raise your hand or unmute. I just want to ask, or put in the chat, I want to ask a quick follow-up to that. I'm curious, as you mentioned, I'm sure my sense, I have not traveled the UK extensively, but I'm sure there's different cultures and vibes at each university. And then I think, when you transition to the Netherlands and Austria, what have been some successful ways you all have found of keeping true with the mission and the transformative ask, however, adapting it to the cultural context of each university you're working with? Just for context, the US, the atmosphere in Seattle is going to be slightly different than middle of America or the East Coast. So curious, beyond each individual school from the network side, how you all have been able to really stay true to the mission in a and applied in a culturally relevant way to that university?
Yeah, so one big thing that we have found is that the UK is fairly unique in the fact that students have direct democracy in most of our universities. We do all students get to vote on things, which is fantastic, which isn't mirrored in most other countries in the world. So one thing that we have developed is how do we do this 100% ask in different ways in the university. So one area that we've kind of broached into is like going like faculty by faculty or department by department for their internal catering, or if they've got a cafe that they run as a department, it's still going for that 100%, but it's perhaps just on a smaller scale of saying, I know geography department at Cambridge goes 100% plant-based as like a potential win we can get out of that. But then on a cultural thing, we do have some agricultural universities where students are running campaigns. Our view on that has been very much like coming back to what is the transformative model of change hoping to achieve, and that is ultimately creating conversation within society. So we understand that maybe in an agricultural university we're not going to get the 100% material win, but because it's an agricultural uni, there's this polarization and tension that gets created when we have the 100% ask that achieves a massive kind of cultural media win because it gets reported on, but without the material win. And then there's some universities where they're quite liberal, like your arts colleges, that sorts of thing, where we get the material win, but it's not particularly newsworthy. So it's kind of there's different wins in different spaces, which I think has been a big strength of ours, is the fact that we're not cookie cutting basically what a win looks like for us. We take different things from different places.
Thank you. So please feel free to type in a question you have, or feel free to unmute yourself. Okay, we have Johanna. I'm from Indonesia. I have several questions. What were the challenges you faced when you first start the movement? What factors do you consider before approaching a university? And how do you decide who to approach, and how would you approach those students?
Cool. Yes, thank you for those questions. So challenges that we faced at the start was just finding people, basically. It's no one wants to be the first to do anything. So that was probably the biggest one. We were fortunate enough that we were coming from an already well-established organization. So we're able to fall back on that in terms of strategy and early guidance. We kind of overcame that by taking an approach of just putting ourselves in the shop window, just getting out there and doing that. No matter if it was one person, two people, three people at a university, just get out there, hand out leaflets, and you're going to find like-minded people. Factors to consider before approaching university. So we don't really have a recruitment policy. It's actually the opposite way around. So we are entirely dependent on people coming to us through our interest form and saying, I'm interested in starting a campaign at my university. So that means that we already have the buy-in from someone in a particular university. We never just go to a university and say, we're plant-based universities, we want you to make this change. It's always ran by students at a particular university. But beyond that, in terms of planning a campaign, we quite emphatically follow the Kingian model of non-violent campaigning, which includes information gathering as your first step of really finding out what are the leverage points, how do we make change within this system, because it's going to look different everywhere, right? So really doing the groundwork rather than having a rigid central strategy. We just say, go and put this in your university. We kind of work back from that and say, we've got these general principles, we know how to roughly effectively campaign, how do we apply that to your university context? And then on that last question, kind of answered that a little bit already, but finding the natural stakeholders in a university. So it might just be one student that's keen and they fill out the interest form. We get the ball rolling with them. But from them, it's who are the people that I can speak to who have an interest in this? So sustainability groups, vegan groups on campus. You can even start talking to people who are campaigning for food accessibility, because as we know, plant-based food is cheaper. You can kind of have that conversation with them. So our approach in that sense is not a rigid one of we're always going to talk about climate, we're always going to talk about X, Y, Z. What are the things that appeal to different groups within the student population as well, and adapting that and changing that as well. And again, focusing on that Kingian non-violent campaigning is that approach really based on how do we create a win for everyone. It's like it's us versus the problem. It's not us versus this other group of people. And that underpins absolutely everything that we do, because we do try to work with anyone who we possibly can and approach it with a collaborative mindset.
Jeremy, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for speaking. I have a question on like how you see like campaigns such as like Veganuary and other you know challenges on like how to go vegan like fit into like helping a university like achieve like the plant-based goals in a sense.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I've got a lot of love for the Veganuary. I've recently got to know Matthew Glover quite well. He's great. I think it's always going to be difficult when you try to run a campaign within a existing community that doesn't have like instant buy-in or an instant stakeholder power in the situation. So Veganuary, which I think is absolutely fantastic, it's done so much for this movement, is always going to be an outsider in the university system. It's always going to be another organization or people working on behalf of another organization doing it, which I think really risks losing people. But when you take an approach that aims to empower individual students within student groups to run a campaign that they have designed and they own, I think you can potentially get a lot further, because you've got stakeholder power, you've got buy-in from the people who really matter here. But with that being said, I think, like Veganuary, or I can't remember what the other challenge is called, maybe it'll come to me. They are good things, but have to be approached in a different way that acknowledges that it's coming in as an outsider rather than someone who's already working within the system.
Maybe have time for one last question if someone has one. Cool. I'll close out with one more. I'm just kind of curious, if you have not had the chance, I definitely recommend YouTubing or watching some of the interviews on British national television that Nathan had mentioned. I think it's really cool to admire just your composure. And I like how you said, we're not pitted against a specific person. We're trying to really focus on the problem. And I'm kind of curious, naturally there's a lot of eyebrows being raised, or people, want to pull someone down that's kind of challenging the status quo. I think just what's your kind of personal advice, and what helps you maintain composure on national television and really, still focus on staying true to your values, but really building those bridges and changing people's hearts and minds? Where the easy route would be to get angry, me versus you and this, and you're wrong. But really what helps you, and by virtue, plant-based universities, really stay positive and grounded and motivated, even though there's going to be some tension and pushback?
Yeah, that's a really important question. I'd say like no one is perfect at this. There are always times that you slip up. But I think grounding our campaign in Kingian nonviolence is where that really like fundamentally begins, and like taking nonviolence seriously. Whether that is through reading, whether that's through doing sessions on it, and understanding that. Well, maybe I'll leave it with a Kingian quote. The idea that like darkness does not drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate doesn't drive out hate, only love can do that. And that ultimately, like, what we're in this for is to create like a peaceful, loving world, and that we don't do that by, as tempting as it is, like rising to debate and rising to the violence that we see around us. So really grounding things in the vision, or like the positive vision of the future and a world that we do want to create. Basically, that's what keeps me grounded, at least.
Awesome. Love it. Well, thank you everyone for joining and your attention. And thank you so much, Nathan, for your time and leadership. And it's really inspiring what you're doing. And we hope this can reverberate across here in the US. So thank you all, and hope everyone has a great rest of your day. And thank you, Nathan.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.